Hi guys, welcome to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Kyra, and here on this channel, we are all about real makeup for real life and real people. So today's video is a when in doubt, dupe it out episode featuring the Urban Decay Naked Cyber palette. When I first saw this palette, I gasped with excitement. That is so pretty and it's so right up my alley. The few swatches that they had at first, just some little ones over on Trend Mood, really got me going. I love duochromes and it would appear that there's quite a few in this palette. So even though I had another video planned to film today, I just got this itch to try and dupe out this palette, dupe the vibes, create my own version. Hopefully it will be a more elevated version of the palette, how I would improve upon the palette, etc. So if you are new here, welcome. And this series is all about duping the vibes or trying to recreate palettes or products that inspire us, that we are keen to purchase, but want to make sure that we don't already have something that is the same or similar or will suffice already in our collection. I do purchase makeup, but I'm also into using what I have. I don't want to buy things to not use them. So today I used my collection of Sydney Grace singles, Beauty Junkie singles, and one depotted ColourPop shadow from a discontinued palette. The point is not for you to go out and purchase these single shadows in any way, shape, or form, but in case any of them strike your fancy, I will have the individual websites linked below for the singles. I hope you'll play along with me and maybe just go through things that you have, even if they're inside palettes. You can certainly grab for a couple of palettes and create looks that might be similar to this. I also am sharing this look that I created with my custom palette today in this video, and at the end I'm going to give you a few ideas for alternatives to this palette in case you might already have something or want to make a smaller purchase, because this palette is $50. $50. So with all that said, let's get into my swatches. So this is what my palette looks like. I definitely feel the vibes of the Urban Decay Naked Cyber, but I also feel like I picked a few shades that are just a little bit more elevated and saturated than what the Urban Decay palette has to offer. So the very first shade in my palette is sort of a metallic cream shade. However, looking at the swatches and the picture of the palette, I do feel like the cream color leans a little bit more to the yellow side. So I did pick this shade from Sydney Grace, and it is called Bailey's Bliss. And I do feel like it is a nice saturated version of what they are showing in the pictures on Trend Mood, which I'll of course have up here and I'll have her linked down below. But the one in the picture looks like maybe a little bit dry and like it's more of a satin, and I just love pigmented shadows, whether they're light or dark. So Bailey's Bliss from Sydney Grace is my dupe for the first shade in the palette, called AI. The second shade in the Urban Decay palette is called Metadata, and for that I picked Sydney Grace Immortal. This is such a beautiful shade. I think it leans very similar to what the palette has to offer. Again, just more, a little bit more shiny, a little bit more me. Such a beautiful shade. I love it all over the lid. Then for the third shade in the palette, which is Virtual, I see like an orangey, peachy, yellowy shade here, more like a yellowy orange. And I had a couple of options, but I ultimately went with this matte single from Sydney Grace called Dirt Road. I don't know if you can purchase this shade singly, but it did come in the Mountain Trails bundle. But I will link all of these shades down below just in case you are looking to add a specific shade to your collection. But this is a nice sort of yellowy tone to get you started in your transition or crease or however you like to use it. And then I feel like that helps pick up on some of the other warmer tones in the palette. The fourth shade in the palette is called Electrode, and I went with this shade right here. Electrode in the Urban Decay palette sort of looked almost like the shimmery version of the previous shade called Virtual. So I ultimately went with Sydney Grace Apricot. It's a beautiful sort of peachy shade. It's an apricot shade, but it has a strong golden shift. And it is one of my favorite shades in my Sydney Grace collection. Next is where I really started going crazy with elevating this palette to fit my preferences. I love light, beautiful, soft lid shades, but I also feel like I need some depth to anchor a look, and I did use this shade as a part of my look today. And it is my dupe for the fifth shade in the palette, which is called Cyberspace. And I went in with Sydney Grace Red Chameleon. To me, this looked like a warm base with a teal to green shift to it. And I feel like Sydney Grace Red Chameleon really does the trick. And again, it adds some depth to the palette that I feel like is lacking in the Urban Decay palette. I'm gonna add just a little bit more because it's not really showing up on camera, the shift anyway. So hopefully you can see a little bit. And of course, I'll have up close swatches at the end. Next is a very standard sort of peachy shade in the Urban Decay palette. I decided to run with that, but also soften it a little bit. And I went with the matte shade called Peyton's Puppy for the shade Gadget. And I love Sydney Grace mattes. This was the very first shade that I used in the look today, and it just started the look off beautifully. I love this shade. It was one of the very first mattes that I ordered, and I am so glad that I did. The next shade is called Call IT, which all of these make me giggle because my son actually works and is going to school to work in IT and computers, etc. So all of these just make me giggle a little bit. So for Call IT, I went in with the shade Sydney Grace Blondie. And it's kind of like a soft, peachy rose gold type shade. And this one's like out of control shine. So much prettier than the one in the Urban Decay palette. So there is that one. I mean, just look at the shine on these. Absolutely stunning. Next is the shade called Not a Bot. And for this one, it looked a little silvery, but it was definitely really light, but it definitely also had some sort of a light blue shift to it. So this is where the shade Blue Mist came into the palette. This is a duochrome from Sydney Grace, and it is gorgeous. And I love the Sydney Grace duochrome formula. I mean, this is a heavy swatch of it, but it will layer over other shadows beautifully. Number 9 is the shade Static. And I felt like this was probably the hardest one for me personally to dupe. So I opted to go a little darker than what it looks like in the palette, but it looks like a nice teal with a green shift to it for me. And so I went in with this shade from Sydney Grace called Dive. It's a beautiful deep teal base with sort of an army green shift to it. It's so pretty. And I could just see layering Blue Mist over this shade Dive. using my palette, it would just be gorgeous. Next, Y3K. Love that shade name. Again, it makes me giggle. My dad was kind of a prepper for Y2K, and he got like drums of water and non-perishable food, solar panels. Yes, it's true. But I loved this shade, and for me, I picked one of my favorite Sydney Grace shadows of all time, and that is the Greatest Gift. It looks like nothing at all exciting in the pan, but what it is sort of a pinky purpley mauve base with some gold and teal reflect, and it is beautiful. This is what I have on the inner part of my lid today, layered over Red Chameleon up here, so hopefully you can see. And then the last two shades, I think most people probably have something similar or something that would suffice for these two, what I would deem non-essential shades to the palette, maybe. But for the shade Override, which kind of looks like a rusty base or warm orangey red base with a little bit of a rose gold shimmer to it, I went with this shade, which is Beauty Junkees Starfield. I love this shade. I actually used this shade in the crease today as well as on the lower lash line for this look, and it's just beautiful. Definitely a favorite shimmery, more satiny maybe, shimmery, not metallic though. Definitely one of my favorite shades from Beauty Junkees. And then lastly, but certainly not leastly, we have this beautiful rusty orange down here. And this one actually comes from my Depotted, which you haven't seen my declutter yet. It will come eventually when I can squeeze it in my schedule. But this is the shade Potion from the ColourPop and Kathleen Light's Dream Street palette. And I tried other singles, you know, that you can actually buy singly, but again, that's not the point. And this one was perfect in my mind to go with the swatches that I was seeing as well as the one in the palette. And I do feel like this is a nice shade to pair with most of this palette. And that, my friends, is my version of the Urban Decay Naked Cyber palette. I think it's so beautiful. I love, love, love the shades that I picked out. I had so much fun doing this. So with all of that said, these are my shades right here and my swatches. So with that said, let's go ahead and dive into this look that I created with my palette today, and then I will give you some of my final thoughts and some comparisons or suggestions at the end. Hey you guys! Alright, I am so excited to get into this palette. I can't even stand it. I'm very inspired by this color story, no matter how close it is to the actual palette. And I also wanted to mention that I am not breaking my 1 month one palette. When I'm filming it, it is the 31st of August. So I just am getting this video filmed by the skin of my teeth. And then for September, I'll only be using my avocado toast palette. So I'm gonna start things off in the transition with this shade right here. This is Sydney Grace Peyton's Puppy. And it's just such a beautiful, sort of soft, maybe even a little bit dusty peach, and I love this type of shade. This is one of my favorite mattes from Sydney Grace, but it's a good chance you have some kind of a peach in your collection if you have a few palettes. Right. Next is kind of a shimmer shade from Beauty Junkees. It's the shade Starfield right here, but I'm going to use it in my crease today. I think it's going to be beautiful, and I think it's going to pair nicely with Peyton's Puppy as well. I love to pair this shade with one of my other favorites from Beauty Junkees, which is called Dash of Curry. And if you've been around for a few of these when in doubt, dupe it out videos, then you probably have seen that. It's sort of like a dusty, rosy terracotta shade, and it is stunning. And I'd love to pair that with this shade. On the outer part of the lid, or the outer V, I'm gonna go in with this shade right here. Again, this is the shade called Potion from the ColourPop and Kathleen Light's Dream Street palette. And it's a really pretty shade, and I'm hoping that this will be sufficient to deepen up the outer corner before we go in with these shimmer shades. I've not layered these two particular shades from Sydney Grace before, but when I layered them on my hand, it worked out. So let's hope it works out on the eyeballs. I'm first gonna go into this shade right here, which is Red Chameleon from Sydney Grace. This has like a warm brown with a good amount of orange to it, base with a teal shift over top. And I want to apply this to the middle-ish part of the lid. And I'm hoping that the orangey brown base from this shade will blend nicely with that rust on the outer part of the lid. The most beautiful shade of them all from Sydney Grace is this one right here called The Greatest Gift. It's kind of hard to describe, but it's got like a pinky purpley, like a mauve-y base with an aqua shift to it, and it is so pretty. I hope it looks as cool on camera. Just kind of going back and forth between the two shades, because I really want to make sure both are present on the eyes, even if that means covering up the outer corner shade a little bit. I feel like I want to go back into a Starfield here and put this on the lower lash line. I'm never against a little bit of shimmer on the lower lash line, especially when it's one that's as beautiful and smooth as this. And then lastly but not leastly, I want to go in with this shade up here. It's a beautiful, very metallic cream shadow that leans a little yellow, and it's called Bailey's Bliss. And I just want to add this as sort of an inner corner, inner crease highlight. Okay, I'm gonna pop off of here, do some liner, mascara, a lip, the hair, some jewelry, all that jazz, and then I will be back to show you the completed look and give you some final thoughts on whether I might still pick up this palette or not. All right, ta-da! This is the completed look. What do we think? I like it. One thing I will say though is I feel like this is a look I would have gotten when I duped the Urban Decay Naked Wild West palette. So if you have that palette, you might not need these tones. Of course, there is a lot more to be explored in this palette. I definitely really enjoyed playing with this. I think, you know, depending on where you start, do you start peach, do you start yellow? Then you can sort of build a look to reflect that. I think, you know, just layering some of the duochromes and whatnot could be a really exciting way to use this palette as well as the Urban Decay one. But I feel like this may have scratched my itch. Of course, I haven't seen any reviews, I haven't seen any swatches from Urban Decay, and so this could be completely off base. It could be much more beautiful than I'm expecting, or I might prefer this version. Let me know down below if you would like to see any kind of follow-up to this video. Do you want to see a couple looks with this palette of mine? I just love duping the vibes of palettes, especially palettes that strike me. However, I did want to make mention of a couple of things that either you might have in your collection already, or that you could just purchase a few shades, whether it be from Sydney Grace or another independent brand. I do think if you have the ABH Moonchild highlighting palette, that you probably don't need this new one from Urban Decay. They layer beautifully over other shadows, over each other, so they're a lot of fun to play with. Same thing if you happen to have your old Kat Von D Alchemist palette, same idea. The other thing I wanted to mention is that Sydney Grace does have 4 single shadows here, the first of which I did include in this palette, that are duochrome shades that would suffice, I think, to add to an existing collection of similar neutrals, etc., and possibly recreate this palette or looks that you might create with this palette from Urban Decay. So this one right here is Blue Mist. This is the one I included in the palette today. This next one is called Red Mist. Ooh, it's throwing off my camera a little bit. My personal favorite, Green Mist. And then Mystery is just kind of that. It's sort of a whitish sheer base, but there's purple, there's red, there's blue, there's just all sorts of duochrome goodness in that shadow. Definitely, you know, got a little bit of purple to it where the others don't. So, I mean, 4 Sydney Grace shadows would definitely come up cheaper, I think, than the Urban Decay palette, or if you like to keep a smaller, more curated collection, you might just consider investing in a few duochrome shadows from whatever brand you prefer, instead of purchasing the entire palette from Urban Decay just for those few shades. I do think that, at least in my mind, I have created a more elevated version of the Urban Decay palette with what I already have. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I love doing these videos. If you ever would like to see a dupe it out video on a specific product, or not just eyeshadow, but a specific product or palette or what have you, just DM me over on Instagram, tag me in a post, whatever, however you want to contact me. All of that information is always down in my description box below. Thanks for hanging out with me today. Let me know if you'd like to see more content with this palette, and I will be sure to fulfill that. I hope you'll subscribe if you haven't already, and then we can see each other again in the next video. And I hope all of your makeup days are absolutely beautiful makeup days, and I'll see you in my next video real soon.